the things that I love the most about psychedelics is that it informs me of that just by existing. It informs me that all of my notions of reality itself are bullshit. They're all bullshit. And I live in this sort of confined, this restrained, narrow, carved pathway world, because that's where I live all the time. But then
sufficient.
And then but then you have a psychedelic experience and it just boom. So all that's gone.
That wonder that you described, that's like a fractional psychedelic experience. So you say, well, they entrust you with their wonder. It's like, yes, they do.
Yeah.
So when we're sitting in this room, most of the things that are going on around us, we're not attending to. So basically, we perceive them as equivalent to zero. So that's kind of interesting because everything around us is infinitely remarkable. And yet we perceive everything as if it's zero. Now, the reason we do that is so that we can use our limited attention on a few things.
Yes.
So it's necessary, but it's also blinding. Now, when you start to wonder about something, what you're actually doing when you wonder about it is freeing your perception from the constraints of memory. And that's a place of dancing. It's a place where memory itself is updated. And if you trust someone and you express that sense of wonder in the confines of that trust, then you are in fact participating in the process that reveals the underlying complexity of the world to you, and then does literally inform you. And you feel that. I've been very interested technically in the instinct of meaning, because what is meaning? And is it illusory? Because that's the fundamental question in some sense. It isn't even, is suffering real? It's, is the meaning that keeps suffering at bay, is that real? That's a more fundamental question. And the answer to that is, it's not only real, it is the most real thing. And you have an instinct that signals its presence to you. And part of that manifests itself as wonder. It's the openness to transformation. Because it isn't even the new ideas that are redeeming. It's the process of continually opening yourself up to the transformation of new ideas. And that's signaled by wonder.
When you're talking about ignoring all the things around you, it made me think about sensory deprivation tanks. And I don't know if we've ever discussed this before.
I don't think so.
Have you ever done that?
Yes.
What did you think?
Well, I thought a bunch of the things that we just talked about. You know, what happens is that in a sensory deprivation tank, you become increasingly sensitive to less and less because there's almost nothing going on. So the threshold for perception, you get more and more and more sensitive as you're trying to pick up signal where there's no signal. And that can open these gates of imagination, for example. You know this already, because to some degree, imagine you want to go figure something out. You usually go somewhere where you can be by yourself. You're not flooded by sensory information. Maybe you go for a walk, or maybe you go sit on your bed. You kind of shield yourself from outside input. And then by concentrating, you open yourself up to this internal revelation that's otherwise blotted out by the external world. And that really happens to a huge degree in the sensory deprivation tank, or can. And I think that is akin in many ways to, and people have made this case many times, is that it's analogous to a psychedelic experience. And I think that's technically true.
It certainly is, because if that experience was achievable through a psychedelic, I think it'd be a very popular psychedelic. If the experience of having no sensory input and being able to be alone with your thoughts, like completely without the influence of even gravity on your body and a seat or the floor on your feet, you don't feel any of it. So
yeah, you start to get, because you've eliminated all that external stimulation, you allow yourself to become aware of things happening that would otherwise be in the background. Jung believed, for example, as Carl Jung, that we're always dreaming. Always. We just don't perceive it because the outer world blots it out. And there's definitely truth in that.
So daydreaming, fantasy.
Well, it's even deeper than that, because look, there's a thread of meaning that guides this conversation. And neither of us know what it is. We know when it manifests itself because we get interested, right? Think, oh, that's interesting. And then, I say something, you think it's interesting, and you nail it with a bunch of words. And then I pick up some of the words and I think that's interesting, and I nail it with a bunch of words. But there's this thread, It's the golden thread that leads you out of Ariadne's maze, by the way, and that's part of the redemptive process, is by following that manifestation of spontaneous interest truthfully, we participate in this process that revitalizes our perceptions. And that's technically true. That's what's happening. And then what's even more cool than that is that there's nothing we can experience that we would rather do than that if it's happening intensely. And that's because that is the best thing we can do. That's the logos. That's the logos.
When you have done,
by definition,
when you have done sensory deprivation experiences, how many have you ever done? Is it
about 6?
6 of them?
Yeah.
Recent?
No, it's been 10 years probably.
Do you think you would benefit from that?
It would depend on how I did it.
I mean, even
conceivably.
Just, why haven't you tried to incorporate that into your life?
I have other things I do that are probably partial substitutes for it, or reasonable substitute. I do Kundalini yoga in the morning.
Oh, do you?
With my wife. I have for 20 years. Not every day, but I'd say a third of the time, and often for months on end.